A note before you listen. BusinessDesk reached out to Duval founder Kenyon Clark several times to ask him and his wife Charlotte Clark to participate in this podcast. While those requests were declined by the Clarks, they did tell us that the allegations made in this podcast are factually and legally incorrect. At the time of publication, New Zealand's markets regulator, the Financial Markets Authority, continues to investigate the Val Group, and to date, no charges have been laid. Our invitation for the Clarks to talk to us and share their side of the story remains open.
Every week, twice a week in fact, Kiwis are asked to imagine.
If I won Powerball, I'd hire a chef to cook me dinner at home every night of the week.
It's the tagline for the long-running and highly successful marketing campaign for Lotto, our national lottery.
You could never part with the house, and I love the sea. Win-win.
No.
Yes.
No.
Cash prizes regularly surpassing the 10 million mark are tantalisingly dangled in front of the public. This call to action, the idea to imagine, is at the heart of the carefully curated image of Duval. With Duval, you didn't need to imagine, however. You could see what a multi-million-dollar lifestyle in action looked like. And if you had the inclination, then they were willing to help you achieve your own. As we all now know, though, it was a facade. Which begs the question, if the success of Duval was artifice, then what was the truth? What was really happening within the operation overseen by Kenyon and Charlotte Clark? What were they telling investors that convinced them to invest their life savings into this seemingly glamorous property development company?
And he's doing an amazing service for New Zealand by building houses in an affordable manner.
And what part did New Zealand's property market play to enable this to happen in the first place?
Oh, New Zealand has a proud history of housing booms and busts for sure, but yeah, that was one out of the box.
I'm Maria Slade, and this is The Fall of the House of Duval. This is part 2 of an investigative series for BusinessDesk. Presenting a veneer of wealth and success was key to the business model Duval founders Charlotte and Kenyon Clark had built around them. One of the things that set them apart was the way they documented it and shared this lifestyle. The name Duval itself sounds a bit posh, aristocratic even, possibly of French origin. Kenyon Clark says his mother, Jennifer, who died in 2018, was the inspiration for the name.
Because my mum was such an influential person in my life, her family name was Duval. Yeah. And that was the reason why I named the business that. I wanted just to remind myself of where I came from.
The company was duly registered, but as Kenyon Clark tells content creator Lawrence Lotz in his Wolf of Queen Street podcast series, spelling is not his strong point.
And then we were building this big tower in Manukau, right? So 200 feet in the air, right? And we had this crane with a huge neon sign on the top with Duval on it. Yeah. And my auntie was driving up to Auckland and she phoned me, "Oh, so nice to see the family name up there. But by the way, you spelled it wrong." And I was like, "Oh my God, Auntie, you're joking. It's meant to be DAVALL." And actually, if I had done that, I would have been able to buy the .com domain instead of the .co.nz domain. But, fuck it. And so I said, "Auntie, I love you. No, I love the family. This is the reason why, but I'm not changing the name now. We are done."
The tower he's talking about is the Lakewood Plaza. And it's hard to miss the Duval Group's flagship development as you drive down Auckland's southern motorway. There's nothing on the landscape even remotely as tall as the problem-plagued apartment complex, except the Mormon Temple on the other side of the Manukau City off-ramp. It makes for a bizarre horizon. The austere 54-metre spire of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, high on the eastern side of State Highway 1, and the lonely 17-storey apartment tower opposite it. Monuments to two different kinds of ambition, perhaps?
I've made it very clear that our goal is to build a multi-billion-dollar business, and I want to give over $1 billion away in my lifetime.
That's Kenyon in the trailer for the Clarks' ostentatious reality TV series, The Property Developers, a series that has yet to air. In an earlier YouTube interview, he tells fellow property developer Grigory Kulinov that he's got plans for New Zealand and he'll always call it home.
But having said that, Charlotte and I, we're taking the kids in the next 18 to 24 months, and we're going to be based offshore. So we're opening offices in Singapore, Hong Kong, mainland China, and in London. And so I'm definitely going to be working on our international rollout.
Remember, this is a mid-sized South Auckland townhouse and apartment developer.
They had the allure of a large multinational development company, which in truth wasn't actually at all true. They weren't that at all.
Rob is a former Duval employee who quickly discovered all that glitters is not gold. He accepted the job when a friend who was working there sold him on the opportunity.
At face value, they appeared to be a multinational, large-scale developer, essentially. And I just knew of other salespeople there that were making good money off the back of selling townhouses off the plans.
Rob isn't his real name. Like many people we approached for this podcast, he doesn't want to be identified because, as he tells us, he's found himself on the wrong side of Kenyon Clark before, and he prefers not to poke the bear. Rob and I first met around the time I became a target of the Clark's ire. This was over a column I wrote, pointing out a key flaw in the business model of property investment firms like Duval, which is that instead of offering their high-risk investments solely to people who can stand it, as the law intends, they promote them widely to ordinary mums and dads, and the market's watchdog, the FMA, has had its eye on the practice for quite some time. The Clarks went nuclear over that piece, and we'll hear more about this in the next episode. But back to Rob. These days he's doing well in a senior property role, and as we sit for a catch-up in his leafy central Auckland office, he describes life at the Duval mothership.
Well, it was very much a loud and proud founder kind of environment. You know, it was all about Kenyon. So it was a Kenyon ego show rather than a genuine reflection of kind of how much they were actually doing in the space. It was kind of like build the ark or portray the ark and they will come, but it was more of a portrayal rather. They hadn't actually built the ark, and it was a lot of things off the plans that they were sort of selling.
Rob says investors who put their money into the Duval funds that backed these projects had no way of seeing behind the scenes.
They had large-scale developments that were in early stage consent that they were receiving funding for, which investors wouldn't know that the underlying agreements weren't unconditional or conditional upon a certain number of sales within those developments for them to even go ahead. So I think on paper it looked a lot more so than what it was.
Rob backs up what we've already heard, that the image Kenyon and Charlotte Clark were creating around themselves was important in attracting investors.
He would speak about it as being a $100 million business or whatever, and I don't think anyone really looked into it as to what that actually meant. I don't know where that value sits in a development company where there's relatively limited IP and a bunch of other stuff, the workflows that were funded by other people. So I think it was a big part in the shiny facade of getting people in the door for sure.
IP means intellectual property, and that's not something a developer of fairly straightforward residential units has much of. Duval did build the 151 apartment Lakewood Plaza Tower in Manukau City. It was a joint venture with Downey Construction, a commercial builder based in Hamilton. But the project was beset by delays and was nearly 2 years late when it was finally completed in 2020. The parties fell out over the problems and cost overruns, and Downey gained an award for $6.6 million against its partner, which, as we record this episode, is yet to be paid. In 2021, a water pipe burst on the 11th floor of the tower, flooding the complex and causing significant damage that has taken several years to remedy. The Lakewood Plaza at 8 Lakewood Court, tucked in behind the motorway interchange, became Duval's headquarters, and the development may have given it credibility. But to Rob, Kenyon Clark's strengths were never as a developer.
I thought Kenyon was a good salesperson, former real estate guy. Nothing that I ever dealt with him about said to me that he was a construction guy. He was just a sales guy and was able to negotiate deals with funders, and that's how he got there.
Many residential property developers need sales up front before they can proceed with a project, so that's not unusual. But not all need to raise funds from the general public, and certainly not with the feverish intensity of Duval. For Rob, the red flags started waving pretty early on.
Like I say, I was starting to dislike it probably about 4 or 5 weeks in. I was making pretty good money there, to be fair. I might have made $70,000 or $80,000 in a couple of months, and it was pretty good. But even the way that they paid their sales staff was not particularly friendly to that. You would sell something, but they would only pay you when the first drawdown of financing came for the project, which again, in hindsight, it was a reflection of the fact that they had no cash. So first drawdown on a project could be years, like you could be talking 2 years. That was one of the main warning signs to me, is I didn't want to be ticking up debt essentially or credit with them and sort of saying, okay, well, and that's how they kept people.
Rob was selling houses off the plans and didn't get involved with pitching the Duval investment funds. But he claims the sales playbook was identical for both.
I would describe it as boiler room sales environment, big ego, big energies. I don't want to say used car salesman environment, but it was hard selling. I learnt a lot sales-wise there, but it was hard sell. You would be pushing through objections to rope people into. It was. I would say it was borderline coercive, because at every sort of I'll think about it, or those signs of objection, it was how do we get around those objections.
Like, what's an example? What would they do?
It would be stuff like if someone said to you, I need to think about it, or okay, why do you need to think about it? I just need to talk to my partner. Oh, cool, was your partner making the decision? What? No, you're making it. Cool. Well, then what do you need to talk to them about? Okay, sweet. And then you just grind them down until you got them to a point where they wouldn't be able to come up with a reason as to why they weren't the one making a decision. And you feel good about this? Okay, well, does it sound like good return? Yeah, it does sound like good. You'd beat them into that corner of kind of going, you're the decision maker and you like the sound of this.
In Rob's view, the tactics Kenyon Clark fostered were aggressive.
But I distinctly remember Kenyon coming over, I think, on one of my first few days, and I was on a call, and he just sort of pulled up a chair and kind of sat in front of me and just looked me in the eye and just went like this while I'm reading through the script essentially to a client, and that's kind of that boiler room, like that's Wolf of Wall Street boiler room sort of a environment where I'm putting you through the ringer on this sort of thing, and that was the environment. Like he'd come in and do that as a bit of a test to how people would cope under that pressure.
My killers who will not take no for an answer. My fucking warriors who will not hang up the phone until their client either buys or fucking dies!
If you need a reminder, that's from the movie The Wolf of Wall Street. To the Duval sales team, Kenyon Clark was the founder, the big man up on a pedestal.
And then you come in and you meet him, and he's all big and jolly and mighty. He's got a big deep voice, and he's, but he doesn't really give you as an individual that much of a time of day, because it's that kind of, I'm bigger and better than everyone. It's kind of, good to meet you, we'll see, let's see how you go kind of thing. And you kind of like, as a junior salesperson in this environment, you're going, fuck, this guy, he's obviously a big deal, and, he's big and important, and I've got to try and, live up to this. And, the good people saw through that quite quickly. But that was kind of that, he was this figure that was not a man of the people. He was a man above the people that you had to try and rise up to be accepted by, essentially. And did you meet the test? And that's what that whole sit in front of you, look you in the eye, do you pass the test kind of thing. It was bizarre.
Rob will never forget the day he left Duval. His boss walked him over to the shopping mall so he could buy a new phone and hand back his work one. But he was too scared to let Rob back into the office.
The sales manager and I sat in the stairwell because he goes, oh, you don't want Kenyon to see you, like when he's on his way in now, and he's going to flip, So we sat in the stairwell for half an hour while my phone's transferring data onto the new phone because Kenyon, he's fucking fuming.
Producer Hamish is engrossed in Rob's tale by this stage.
This again, that godlike complex where now he's flipped and where everyone's scared and we're hiding in a stairwell. Like, it was wild.
The wrath of Kenyon.
The wrath of Kenyon,
It's behaviour the Clarks seem almost proud of. Here's Charlotte and Kenyon in The Property Developers.
At home, Kenyon is a big, cuddly bear when it comes to the children. At work, Kenyon is like a bull in a china store.
I'm a very difficult human being to be around.
As we know, Kenyon Clark declined to be interviewed for this podcast. However, he voluntarily sends us a set of statements and pieces of audio to go with them. In one statement, he says he has never taken a home buyer's full deposit who couldn't complete the purchase come settlement day. He says Duval helped hundreds of people into their first home, and its conspicuously high profile reflected its wider values of strengthening the community it operated in. Here's his recorded version.
We put up to $100 million a year into South Auckland and built communities, not just houses.
There's that 100 million figure again. And it's not the way former Duval employee Rob remembers things. He describes how Duval salespeople, who were not regulated by the Real Estate Authority, the REA, were selling homes off the plans at a time of rock-bottom mortgage interest rates.
When it came time to settle on a lot of the properties that were sold, a large portion of those would have had to default because they wouldn't have been in a position to settle. They were barely able to settle by the criteria at the time. These were families that were earning, maybe $80,000, $90,000 a year combined household income, and then you've got advisors, unqualified advisors. They're not REA advisors. They're because you're selling private stock, telling these people, based on a test, so that the banks will give you in 3 years at an interest rate of, on a bad day, 3.5%. Well, as it turns out, 3.5% wasn't the case when these settled. It was at 7%, and the test was at 9%. So really, I don't know what happened to these people, but.
So they just wouldn't have been able to.
They wouldn't have been able to. They were putting up, 5 to 10% deposits, and the calculation put in front of them was, hey, look, based on your income now, at a test rate of 4% interest rate, at 80% lending, you'll be fine. Well, the test rate was 9% when most of these settled, and I can tell you now that of the people that I saw and dealt with, none of them would have been fine.
Bank chief economists are unique creatures. Not only are they smart and wise in the ways of financial markets, they're independent commentators and really good at putting things in words of one syllable. We track one down to get them to explain what was going on in the housing market at the time of Duval's rise and fall.
I'm Sharon Zollner, I'm the Chief Economist of ANZ New Zealand.
Sharon Zollner is a media regular and particularly great at translating complex matters into everyday speak. I ask her about the unprecedented events of 2020 and 2021, when the Reserve Bank slashed the official cash rate, the OCR, to deal with the effects of the COVID pandemic. Excuse the financial alphabet soup, but it dropped the OCR way lower than even during the global financial crisis, the GFC, a decade earlier. We saw a period where interest rates dropped to historic lows. The OCR went to 0.25% in 2020. Even after the GFC, it only went down to about 2.5%, I think. Standard one-year interest rates got down to just over 3%. Really, really cheap. What effect did that have?
Yes, it certainly put a fire under the housing market. I mean, essentially, how much people can borrow has a big impact on. Just to hold that thought.
The other fab thing about visiting bank economists is they work in swish downtown offices with in-house baristas.
Thank you.
Sharon picks up her coffee and the story.
There's a pretty reliable relationship between interest rates and house prices, and a lot of that comes down to the fact that it influences how much you can borrow. A lot of people borrow as much as they can. And when interest rates go down that much, then suddenly the maths changes in terms of your repayments and what's affordable. So suddenly people could borrow more, therefore they could bid more, and in a hot housing market, the prices shot up very rapidly. They rose 50% in 2 years from what was generally agreed were too high levels to start with. It was the biggest housing bubble we have ever seen.
35 at 2435 at 2,452,500.
It couldn't go on, and in October 2021, the Reserve Bank started hiking the OCR.
It was a bit of a perfect storm. It was a dramatic U-turn we saw in the market. Not only did the Reserve Bank abruptly change its tune and start talking about hiking, which then meant that the market started to price future hikes, which meant that those fixed mortgage rates shot up well before the official cash rate actually did. Those fixed rates always preempt the actual moves in that overnight rate. So that happened, which rapidly reduced how much people could borrow.
There was also other stuff going on, such as new tighter credit rules, which caused banks to go through people's bank statements, drawing red lines under things like Uber Eats purchases and streaming subscriptions.
Yeah, so that was really aimed at loan sharks, but it was fairly loosely written, and it caught just regular mortgage lending as well. So what it meant was that you had to jump through a lot more hoops, produce a lot more evidence of what you were spending your money on down to a very detailed level. It sort of became a 3-month process to get a mortgage, and that meant that right at the peak of the market, a lot of buyers, particularly first home buyers, were essentially locked out for a cooling down period, one could say. And it's fair to say that once they did have their ducks lined up, things looked quite different. But the house prices peaked in November 2021, but by early 2022 it was clear that things were turning, and they did turn quite ferociously. So although it was an enormous housing bubble, it was a very quick one.
Because it was so quick, it created more stress for individuals than it did for the financial system. For those who bought at the peak of the market, particularly those buying off the plans, it was brutal.
Yeah, so if you've got a townhouse that you'd agreed to pay, say, $800 for, and you had a 5% deposit, 2 years later, that townhouse might have been worth $700 or even $650, and the bank could turn around and go, hang on a minute, we are not going to lend you that much money.
And in some cases, people might actually make the choice themselves that the deposit they would walk away from would be a smaller loss and then actually going through with the purchase. So we saw a bit of that as well.
The COVID pandemic was completely uncharted territory, and the Reserve Bank was pulling every lever it could. What many ordinary Kiwis didn't understand at the time is that it was also printing money to stimulate the economy. Sharon says in hindsight it was massively overdone, but the central bank was terrified of the country's finances going into freefall. There's a bit of complicated economics in here, but in short, money printing, or quantitative easing as it's called, meant a lot of cheap dosh floating around, and a fair bit of it made its way into housing, pouring more fuel on an already blazing market. It was a global pandemic, these were crazy times. We'll probably see a boom again, but this was exceptional.
Oh, New Zealand has a proud history of housing booms and busts for sure, but yeah, that was one out of the box. To see house prices rise 50% in 2 years, that was unprecedented. We had the lowest mortgage rates ever. We had the money printing, which you'd never seen before. Not only that, the Reserve Bank suspended the loan-to-value ratio restrictions. So that's, call it what you want. The upshot was it was a significant temporary easing in credit conditions. That is, for a limited time, it was made a lot easier to borrow a lot of money to buy a house. Investors were told, fill your boots before we shut the door in your face again. It set off a frenzy, an absolute dogfight between first home buyers and investors. We'll never be able to quantify the impact of that, but it was a one-time, limited time special, and I think it did a lot to cause the housing market to take off very, very quickly.
At 2,480,000 it goes. It is sold straight down the middle at 2,480,000.
The flip side of these extremely low interest rates is that anyone with money to save was getting practically nothing for it sitting in the bank. In this environment, the 10% returns Duval and its kind were offering were very alluring. This is a key ingredient in the seductive Duval cocktail, and we'll hear more from Sharon Zollner on this in the next episode. Rob, the former Duval employee, doesn't know what happened to those investors and would-be homeowners after he left, but we do. Kate decides to speak to us because she wants it out there how ordinary people, teachers, farmers, tradies and administrators like her, have been affected. She doesn't want her real name used because even though she's a victim of the Duval collapse, she's still embarrassed about how she was swept up in its promises. Kate has lost $150,000 in Duval. She's one of 134 investors owed at least $64 million, not including the interest they should have earned. Most are unlikely to see that money again. Kate used to follow the blow-by-blow of the unfolding saga, but that was when she still had hope. Now she tries to protect herself from the despair.
It sort of dawns on you that there's nothing much you can do. This just has to play out, and the more involved I felt I was being, the more hurtful and more confronting it was. So I made a decision to remove myself.
Kate had recently divorced and moved to Auckland when she decided to invest in Duval.
The only way I got introduced to Duval is because I was investing money just in very safe managed funds after my divorce. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to buy property in a rush. And my fund manager her partner basically introduced me to Duval and said, oh, well, I know somebody who's working for him, and they're saying that they're doing quite well in the property front, and they're developing houses, getting a good return, and they've got this mortgage fund where you can just put in a certain amount of money and you'll get quarterly return of, paid out annually 10%. And that's a good way of sort of getting some sort of income while you decide where you're going to invest the rest of your funds and while you look for work and things like that.
She visited Duval's offices and even met Kenyon Clark briefly. They all seemed very busy. Kate now wishes she'd listened to her gut.
In hindsight, which is, amazing, you could see that there was probably not that much transparency. And the few red flags I decided to ignore, and I put it down to my lack of experience in that field, because I've not invested like that before.
You may ask why a seemingly intelligent person like Kate would ignore red flags. But remember, she was going through a difficult divorce and was vulnerable, and she trusted Duval's convincing sales pitch. And the fact she wasn't familiar with aspects of the investment, like the long lead times for getting her money out, which are not unheard of in the sector, shows it wasn't suitable for her.
When I said, when will I be able to retrieve my money if I want it out? Like you at least not for 2 years, you won't be able to, or at least a year, but you need to give us a very, very good amount of time, maybe hopefully 3 to 4 months before we are able to give you your money back. I wasn't comfortable with that. I wasn't comfortable that I won't have access to my own funds. So I still just let it be because I'm not sure if that's supposed to be okay.
When Kate received her first payment, Duval seemed unreasonably pleased with itself, continually talking up its performance. Kenyon Clark's own swaggering talk about how he wasn't dependent on New Zealand lenders or suppliers also unsettled her.
He was very confident. He was saying that things don't stop him. If New Zealand is not able to lend him money, he can go overseas. Because I had also invested. I'd actually bought a property off the plan and even convinced my parents to buy a property off the plan, so that we'd also done that.
Yes, you heard that right. Kate had not only invested in Duval's mortgage fund, she'd agreed to buy 2 townhouses off the plans. She'd convinced her parents to withdraw their retirement savings to purchase alongside her in the yet-to-be-built Mountain Vista Estate, a development of 180 units in Mangere, described as a purpose-built community. The dream was that they could live next to each other as her mum and dad aged, but it never came to fruition. As we talk, Mountain Vista Estate is still not finished, and Kate has moved to Australia to try and financially re-establish herself. Duval is now run by PwC, one of the Big Four accounting firms, who were appointed as statutory managers following the August 2024 raid. PwC hopes to have Mountain Vista Estate completed by early 2026. When her family's new homes didn't materialise, Kate found herself in a battle with Duval.
After a lot of heartache, a lot of work, calls, meetings, we held them liable that you promised us that you would give us the deposit back. After 3-4 years, it's not going to be built. I'd like my deposit back. They were still like, are you sure? Because I promise you, as soon as you sell this, it's going to go up in value. I said, no, that's fine. Because as soon as you sell it, it's going to go up in value. And the way they were still trying to convince me to hold on to it. And I was thinking, if it's going to go up in value, you should be happy to sell it to me. I don't understand why you're forcing me to keep it. If you're so confident that this property is going to go up in value, then keep it and sell it yourself.
Kate started to realise things were really not right when she and other Duval investors were invited to a swanky function at a fashionable Auckland eatery in late 2023. Remember, by this time, the housing market had well and truly turned.
It was in Parnell, Chibo restaurant in Parnell. Expensive flowers and, champagne flowing and everything. He had this huge presentation. He was saying how amazing New Zealand properties were doing and property prices are going to be going up, and how he's helping build houses for New Zealanders because New Zealand doesn't have enough houses. We're all doing an amazing thing, and he's doing an amazing thing, an amazing service for New Zealand by building houses in an affordable manner, and that he wants to go public. If we were to convert our funds to public, we would get twice the shares as opposed to buying it like other investors.
This was the Clarks' next grand scheme. Duval was going to list on the stock exchange, the NZX, and to encourage investors to convert their investments in the funds into shares, it was offering them a sweetener. PwC, now in charge of Duval, says the share offer is one of the most concerning aspects of the whole saga. What on earth the valuations were based on, and where it leaves investors who did decide to swap their investment for shares. After the Chibo whining and dining, Kate was initially convinced.
I walked out of there thinking, yep, I want to convert. It sounds amazing, because I believed him. I didn't think people could stand up there so confidently and lie in front of the very people that have invested in him and his words and his vision.
Kenyon Clark has made it clear in repeated statements to us and on his Instagram account that he believes nothing failed with Duval. The failure lies in negligent regulatory overreach and the self-serving actions of the statutory managers, PwC, he told us in an unsolicited email. Here's another of the audio statements he sent for us to use.
Duval was valued at $600 million on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. We had a diversified shareholding which is needed for a future listing on the NZX. We had usable cash and approximately $150 million in unconditional pre-sales supported by deposits in our solicitor's trust account. By any objective measure, that's success for a property developer.
In the end, Kate didn't take up the share offer. I ask, what changed her mind?
The fact that I had this one guy, Ben, constantly calling me. Usually I could never get in touch with them when I really wanted to get out of the house. When I said, I want my deposit back, you guys have not kept up your end of the bargain. I want my money back. They were very hard to reach. And when it came to converting the shares, I was getting calls every day, twice a day.
Along with seeing a very different side of Duval, realisation was also dawning that the group had done a very investor-unfriendly thing. It had frozen their returns. In fact, several months earlier, the Financial Markets Authority, the FMA, had given Duval a serve for misleading investors about the real reasons they weren't getting their payouts, which was that Duval was short of cash. Ordinary people like Kate don't tend to be casual readers of the FMA's website, so most investors wouldn't have been aware of this development. Kate spoke to her Duval rep again.
I said, so am I getting my next quarterly payment? Because no, we won't be able to till we convert into the public shares. I said, so when is that? Oh, we're not too sure yet, maybe just a few months. I said, so they didn't announce that we're actually going to freeze your funds. So I said, okay, can I get my money out? Yep, once we go in public. I said, but I don't want the shares. I just want my money. We won't be able to do that yet. So it was very sort of dodgy.
After that, there was no more regular reporting. In fact, Kate tells us that she has never heard from Duval again.
I was so worried. All I was thinking is what I could be doing with my money right now. My dad wasn't feeling, he hasn't been well, and there were so many things that I was wanting to do with him, and those were the funds that were supposed to be reasonably liquid for me. 2 to 3 months. Yes, I'll tell them 2 to 3 months ahead of time. I can get my funds out. I still haven't bought property. After being burnt like that, I'm so risk averse. I'm not able to make a decision on how to progress with finances now.
Kate considered joining a class action being brought by a group of other Duval investors. It was led by Carl Lindemann, a semi-retired whangamata electrician who did convert his investment into shares and lost over $2 million. The legal action was ultimately unsuccessful. We can't talk to Carl Lindemann because tragically he was killed in a car accident in September 2025. He'd suffered a suspected heart attack while driving, and his grieving partner has told us she believes the stress of the Duval collapse was to blame. Kate had already decided against joining the action for that reason.
Realistically, that was just good money after bad, and just heartache. It was just the emotional trauma of it. I realized that I was actually getting sick. I was getting into this really bad space, emotionally, mentally, and I didn't want to affect my health. It's already happened,
The markets watchdog, the FMA, continues to investigate Duval, but has yet to bring any charges. Kenyon Clark gives regular updates on Instagram about how many days it has been since the August 24 raid on his house and business without charges being laid. As we prepare this episode, he posts, "You've climbed a very tall tree, FMA. How do you plan to climb down?" Although Kate doesn't expect much these days, she welcomes the FMA's investigation.
I wanted to go to the FMA a long time ago when they were acting dodgy. When he didn't convert, when he froze our funds and wasn't giving it. There were signs, there were all these signs, and I wanted to go to FMA. But then I thought, if I go to the FMA and they take some sort of action, that's going to be useless because then Kenyon will be held liable for something will happen and investors are the first ones to suffer. All I was doing is hoping that it'll work out.
Kate laughs at another of Kenyon Clark's Instagram posts that reads, "The real gang patches are worn by government regulators."
He has made many, many decisions that could have prevented this. He had access to funds. He was in a powerful position. He could have made this successful. He could have managed investors' expectations much better than this as well. He has let everyone down. There was never any clear communication from him, yet he was happy to go in his helicopter and go shooting and hunting and, living his extravagant, elaborate life, renting an expensive house and sending his kids to private schools and enjoying his life. So,
If Kenyon and Charlotte were listening to this, what would you say to them?
Do you guys know that you're living off other people's money? And then you're actually showing off about it? Why would people be interested in what you're doing with other people's money? You have no conscience.
Next time on the fall of the House of Duval. As the public image fades, Duval can't pay its subbies, but it can pay its lawyers to take heavy-handed action against anyone who speaks out.
The reason why that anybody embarks upon abusive lawsuits is really to control the narrative and to silence critics.
The whole meeting was extremely hostile and occasionally abusive. But, when it became obvious that we were not going to back down and we were not going to remove the article, they stormed out of the meeting.
Oh my God, I thought I was in the set for Peaky Blinders, to be honest. It felt like that. People would slip back here and it was subtle bullying.
The Fall of the House of Duval is researched, written and hosted by me, Maria Slade. It's produced by Hamish Williams with sound design by Mick Andrews. Our executive producers are Duncan Bridgeman and Jane Yee. Special thanks to Victoria Young, Garth Bray, Ethan Sills and Isabella Iramia. The Fall of the House of Duval is a Business Desk production for NZME.